Hey guys, GWS here. Finally, for some more feel-good, positive content for you. I think I finally found a breakthrough in game corruptions after all these years, after searching for the El Dorado of corruption goals, which is number one, to produce interesting effects a huge percent of the time, and number two, I think most importantly, is a way of corrupting that will not crash games, or at least has a very low crash percentage. Um, and to explain this problem, we're going to go through a number of random iterations. We may get a lot of good corruptions, but you're going to notice there's going to be a lot of crashes. So I just kind of want to show you a little bit of what we're used to. What my algorithm at least seems to produce, and then a basic framework that I have programmed. This is all going to be free, and you're free to use this. Anybody's free to add this to their own personal corruptor. I have this on mine, and I will be expanding on it. I'm probably going to add, I might add subroutine calls to the headers of what defines a function, but I think I'm going to leave at least the broad thing as it is, because the way most games are structured, at least on cartridges, is you have your routine, your main routine that runs. It'll call subroutines. The subroutines will return back to the routine, and then the routine will continue functioning. And then you'll have like a certain space in code reserved for subroutines. So it'll just be one subroutine kind of after another. And then sometimes you'll have multiple routines within a subroutine that can be called. But, you know, I basically consider a subroutine the whole between the start and end points, as you can easily define them. And then, of course, there is data in music. Data in music are particularly difficult because it's not always easy to distinguish between data and code. You can run a lot of tests, and I'm sure you can do it, but it's not an easy thing to do, and in doing so, you can kind of limit yourself. So I have something that's probably 90% effective. But anyhow, we're going to go through some pure random. We're going to be doing Super Mario World, because that's the easiest, fastest thing. And it's the one game that is code heavy and not graphics modification heavy. Because the whole, like, as you get into, like, more graphically oriented games, what you end up with is, although you're not going to get a title screen crash, you'll get a lot of soft locks, and you'll kind of see that problem emerge, because we'll also be doing some Zelda, so I'm going to show you some of that too. So let's look for our Super Mario World thing here. So we'll go ahead and load that. I have a bunch of little things here that I've already done. Okay, so we're going to open up our corruptor. What all this means isn't particularly important, because they're just basically types of corruptions. The only one you're going to really need to know is this sub snipper and what I just call anything goes. I should actually just call this spray and pray, because all this does is it takes the byte array of the file, chooses X amount of bytes to edit. The bytes are determined by the number of corruptions here, and then it saves it to the copied file, not the original file, but the copied. So we'll go ahead and do this, and we're going to use 200, because this is a fairly high number of corruptions normally, and we're going to see how this runs and you're going to notice some differences. So let's start running this. Let's see if we can have a little bit of fun. We'll probably find some interesting stuff in here, so this isn't just doom and gloom. So here is Super Mario World, and it already appears we have a crash, and we do. So we'll go ahead and redo this, load some new corruptions, and another crash. Well, kind of. This is a little bit interesting right here. We have a half-eaten up screen, no graphics to speak of. I already have a pre-built data here. I think I'm going to build a new one. I think I'm going to do a new one, because this one starts at the Switch Palace and you kind of got to wait. And as you can see, we're crashing. And this is what is super common and super frustrating with doing corruptions, because you'll run into a few, but the problem is you get all these crashes, like, you know, slight curiosities we're seeing, but we're not seeing anything we can play with, anything we can kind of explore the world in. Like, we get title ding into cave music, so we'll see if we could get something here. And as you can see, we're having a lot of trouble. And we get fire blowing. Okay. Let me get this off of here first of all. Okay, so as you can see, yet another crash. We haven't got a single one working yet. See, we're also working with a lot of bytes. You could turn this down and you won't get nearly as many, but then you're also going to lower your chances of finding something interesting. And this anything goes. So this is a pretty common one, actually. It's actually, I think that's more of a debug thing, but see, this is a little bit. We're in something. It's just the graphics aren't loading. But I guess you could call that a semi-interesting type of thing. See, now we're at game over. Let's see if we get some graphics to load. And I'm pretty sure the game is working, it's just not showing the graphics. So we're getting either crashes or not working at all. So we'll try a couple more. We'll see if we can get something interesting. I'm not going to beat this to death because... Now see, it's stuff like this that the anything goes will produce. Like, you'll get brief flashes, you'll get color, you'll get super interesting stuff. It's a very high risk, but yet high potential reward type of system. And in fact, even with this method, like the anything goes, it's always going to have the highest potential. But you're going to have to keep redoing this 1,000 times over. And to me, it's not worth it, especially considering if you can get stuff to work right, then like the number of options is still incredibly high for interesting stuff. So you got this, which is crashing nearly every time. And then let's try something kind of in the intermediate range. See, these are things I've been developing, and this improves the probability that you're going to get something positive. So let's look for one here. Let's look for not one of the good ones, because some of these are actually really good. They're probably close to 30 to 40% working. So let's go process flag invert. I think this is pretty good. So we'll go invert and we'll go neutral. Now what this does is the processor and the SNES, it has flags for example, if you're reading from this particular place in memory, did it read a value of 0? And you'll have what are called compare functions that'll say, if you last read 0 from memory, do this. or if you wrote 0 to memory. Anything that'll turn that processor flag that says, was 0 just read, it could branch off of that to some other place in memory. So what this does is this will either invert that, or it'll turn it neutral. Neutral, I think, just means it'll always set it to 0 regardless. I think. I can't remember exactly how I set these. So we'll go ahead and do these. These are this is a standard kind of corruption. So we'll do this and we'll start loading. And we'll see if we get better results. Now as you see, we're already getting something that looks cleaner. No title music playing, no music playing, period. And this is also a perfect example of what you'll get with some of these. Like you'll get something that produces more consistent results, but it'll be less interesting results. And that's what a lot of these I've designed are for. And this was my second kind of innovation. You've had you've had innovations from other corruptors. I think real-time corruptor and all that, they have their different methods and algorithms. See, as you can see, we're getting more interesting stuff because the game's not crashing. It's producing interesting looking graphics, especially stuff that's different. It's not letting us go into most levels, except for some strange reason, the Yoshi level. Let's see if it'll let me go into Switch Palace for the hell of it. So a lot of this is corrupted, but as you can see, this is the first one that produced something that did not immediately crash. So this was part of what I was working on. Stuff that does specific stuff to... And as you can see, we're going to have problems with collision already. I can already tell. But our map kind of crashed. So you get stuff like this. It's still going to crash a bunch. And we'll get into why in a second. But you get little interesting things like this. Like the Mario's Y offset's been drastically altered in that one. And in fact, it seems like Mario's just appearing everywhere. Like, look at him standing up there. Like, see, we're offset. Like, we're still in the same spot. Because, see, I guarantee you if I go run into an enemy, I'm gonna die. I don't know how I didn't die there. Okay, let's run in. Yep. Because, see, we're just offset is what we are. And our text is blue. And as you can see, a lot of small effects this creates, because we're kind of constraining the specific thing that we're doing. So it produces a lot more smaller kinds of effects, predictable kinds of effects. But as you can see, this is already pretty interesting. Like, we're still crashing quite a bit, and we're still kind of corrupt. We're still either soft-locked or nearly soft-locked most of the time toward the beginning of the game. But it's pretty interesting. Let's go through a couple of more of these. This is actually one of the more well-behaved ones. Like, you'll see, I have a lot that are more high-risk, high-reward, but they're more tempered, where you get the high reward more often, but you still get a lot of the high risk, 70 to 80% crashes. And then you get stuff like that crashes near. So this is one of the more highly behaved ones. And the reason, and the whole problem I've always faced is this difference between data, procedure, and subroutines. And I have a few specific subroutine things here, but I've never really been able to kind of, I guess, take advantage of the subroutine stuff. So we have a couple subroutine things here. I think these are very high risk, high reward, but they're kind of in the same line. So these are my 3 subroutine corruptions. So let me explain what these is. JSR skip, what that'll do is it'll turn a call to a subroutine into what's called a no operation. It'll write 3 to 4 depending on the type of subroutine jump. No operations. So basically what it'll do is it'll just say, don't even run this subroutine. Like skip it. And then you got this, which is basically says, instead of jumping to a subroutine, return to the previous subroutine. So basically what that would mean is instead of adding another function to what's called the call stack, you're just going back to the previous function. And then of course you're taking off the stack, and it's kind of interesting what you could get with that. And then you got JSR equals pull accumulator x2. I'm not exactly sure what my theory was behind that, other than like continue, like don't return, but basically to just pull stuff from the stack to reduce the call stack by 1, so that when you go to a new subroutine you're going back 2 functions. It's probably hard for you guys to understand, but I didn't really have an algorithm even when I wrote these, but these are kind of part of it. And so what these, and this new one is the breakthrough, because see, these edit the call to the subroutine itself, which is very, very risky of a function, because when you're combining 2 subroutines, you're basically combining 2 things that may not even work together at all. And so we won't really get into that, but that's where I kind of started with it. And then there's this new one. This new one is, at least from my testing, only producing maybe a crash 1 in 20 attempts, which is insane. And we're going to go through this, and hopefully we get a good sample and you'll see the difference. We're going to do 200 bytes. We're going to do the exact same thing. Just make sure only that's selected, though. I don't want anything else contributing. So we're going to do a lot of these. And basically, what this does is, this is what I call a subroutine snipper. As you can see, subsnip. So what this does is it will take the final opcode, it'll take the size of the subroutine, randomize a point where instead of running the next opcode, you return. So in other words, you're only running maybe half of the subroutine, and then you'll return to the previous. And I use assembly to do this, and I also use what I call bad byte checking. So, which means, like, for example, if there are zeros, it's not going to choose that particular subroutine. And it goes by subroutine size. We'll get into the code, though. I don't want to get too much into this. I want to show the code for maybe the one person who even understands what the hell I'm talking about. But as you can see, I'm already run this, and we got palette changes, we got changes of the color of the smoke, we got changes of Mario, and we have not seen a crash yet. but we're seeing interesting effects happen. Like, for example, that mushroom doesn't understand what collision is. And bye-bye Yoshi. I'm assuming all the enemies are falling off. Yeah, I just saw one fall off. So, only Mario seems to know what collision is. And every time I've run this, I've gotten similar types of effects in terms of like having the interesting effects but having no crashes whatsoever. And I can't even touch the goal, so it's soft locked, and you'll get a lot of soft locks with this, but you won't get any pure crashes, or you won't get many. And when you get them, it'll be like far along in the gameplay. Like, see, we had the title screen. Like, it didn't appear, but it went as normal. And what's interesting, Mario's swimming, so we're getting that interesting effect. And as you can see, again, no crashes, but we've seen a lot of interesting effects. And this is just from snipping, from just, like, and see another interesting effect. See, it's like the physics are all whacked out. This is common. And we died somehow. So this is what is producing so many wacky effects and extremely high. I see now we finally crash. But look at how long we got to play before we crashed. And this is with 200 corruptions, mind you. This is actually kind of on the higher end of what you want before you start getting bad effects. And here's a title crash right here. So I'll run this again. So yeah, it's gonna crash at title from time to time. Like anything, I don't think you're gonna get anything that doesn't crash at title. You know, but again, like, this is live, like, I haven't selected anything whatsoever. And yet we're getting these effects live. Like, this is just a random sample, and again, we get the impact where we're not seeing enemies. And we get a crash. Again, like I said, it's gonna happen. But see, notice we've had one title crash in how many attempts? And see, from what I'm calculating, this would be one of the higher crashing types. Because this is cutting out half of a subroutine. Like, there was a lot of functionality being lost. Like, so see, the sky's the limit, and I'm gonna try more of these assembler style edits, but at the subroutine level. So we'll go through a couple more of these. Like, we've kind of already seen some of these effects. It might be that this particular one is producing a lot of these swimming effects, because what I've seen with this game in particular is this really screws with the jumping physics. So as you can see, we're running from the charging chuck here. See, I want to find a... See, it's... That's the thing, is like, it's hard to even know the rules. But that's part of the fun. And again, we get a crash at Yoshi. This is probably going to be pretty common. This was common in testing. That, like, when you hit the Yoshi blocks, like, stuff started happening. gonna have a problem killing some enemies here, as it doesn't seem like the turtles want to die. But okay, we'll go ahead and see. We'll try one more after this one, and then we'll get into how I program this, and we have a problem killing enemies, apparently. So, let's go back in here. We learned our lesson. Sorry for trying to kill you. Hey. Oh. Hang on, I want to get one-ups. So see, here's already this effect I haven't even seen anything close to. As you can see, the animations are screwed up too. Like they can't turn. So get one-ups to your heart's content. See, I was going to go through Zelda, but I don't think it matters so much. It's interesting what happened when I... And again, Yoshi causes things to screw up. So let's do one more, and then we'll get into my documentation of the code. Alright. Oh, look at this. See, we're seeing something a little bit new every time. Like, it's producing a lot of similar effects. And here's this crash again. I've seen this one before. The map crash. So, apparently the rules I have set, and another problem too might be I don't have good rules for this. So, let me put this down, and then we will look into the code of this. So this is my new sub-swapper function. And it takes a byte of arrays. This is the byte of the ROM itself. This is kind of the way my specific program is structured. But you don't need to worry about all of this. So basically what this is a specific snipping thing. Like, don't even really worry about this. This is particular to the kind of corruption. But it's this function right here, or this part right here that we're going to be looking at. Between this if and end if. And what this is well, actually, between this and then this return distance right here. So let me go over the return distance. First of all, the definition of a function, as I have listed it, is the distance between the last, this is the SNES, but it's going to work similarly across consoles. The last return to subroutine and the next return to subroutine. Return from subroutine. So what that means is you kind of have a block between subroutine returns. Now what this does is this randomly this randomly selects a byte within the file loaded, an SNES file, and then it determines whether that byte is a return call. And then if it is a return call, or at least a potential return call, then we go to our loop that determines the return distance. The return distance is the number of bytes between returns, but not counting bad bytes. So, for example, if we were if this is what's called byte properties. Byte properties is basically if the byte value is what I determine to be a bad byte, a bad opcode, or just not an opcode at all within the current architecture that we're working with. With the SNES, we're working with the 6502, and hopefully, I don't have it right in front of me, right here, this is the opcode list of the SNES processor, and basically if it is not one of these values, or if it's one of the values that I do not want to use, then you immediately return. You immediately return distance 0, which basically says that we're not going to use this because of this down here. This is return distance between 7 and 50. So what this means is if the subroutine size is between 7 and 50 bytes, this is when we will perform the operation. In this particular function, you know, we're just ending the subroutine prematurely. So that's what the snipped means. This can mean any number of things. Like, for example, you can edit a random byte between the return distances. But basically what this is this return distance greater than or equal to 7, less than or equal to 50 means, like, if it's not between 7 and 50 bytes, we're not going to use it. And that's when we kind of go up here and then we find another byte to use within a subroutine that fits our criteria. And so basically, I know I went through a lot there, but the basic thing is number one, you find two subroutine points, and then you do assembly on every byte within those. That is, you look at the opcode, you look at the size of the opcode, and then you count the number of bytes of that opcode. That's what this num bytes is. This is the number of bytes in the opcode, and then you add that to the distance, and then you check the byte at that point, so that you're not reading a return from the actual data. You only want to look at the opcodes themselves. And then, of course, if it's a bad opcode, if it's, for example, a value of 0, a value of 255, or it's some kind of emulation turn on, like some kind of nonsense value that you wouldn't see in SNES code, then you just set this to 0, where it's never going to execute the next bit, and then you exit the loop. So that's basically the algorithm of it. I don't think I've done a very good job of explaining this, but I at least wanted to have this documented, and you can look at the code and try to make sense of it for yourself. I'll also explain it to you in the comments if you have questions. I could probably explain it better in writing than I can in a video, but I always think it's good to document these kinds of breakthroughs because they can definitely help advance something, kind of almost a dying breed of ROM hacker. And this is something I'd like to bring back, because the corruptions, I think if they're done right, can bring emergent gameplay. Like one example that I found interesting, it almost produced something interesting. I was doing Zelda tests, and with Zelda, this particular thing, it works very well. It doesn't crash. A lot of corruptions will crash A Link to the Past, and it's hard to get good ones. But with these, I was able to play for a while. And one thing that I found was, I found one where it would not let soldiers move down. Like, the AI was the same. Everything was the same. The soldiers just would not move down. And I found that pretty interesting. It almost produced an actual gameplay kind of mechanic. And what I would like to produce someday is something that will, for once, be something that can be used. like as a speedrunning category, like you're running this corruption hack, for example. But anyhow, this is my documentation of my new subroutine corruption method. Thanks for listening, guys, and God bless.